And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. While many lawmakers are always harping on getting tough on crime, some rarely focus on the victims left behind who suffer. That's where one victim's advocate says at least half the attention needs to go on the survivors. Joining us from Denver, Colorado is Andy Kahan with Crime Stoppers, who's out of town right now. Andy, when you see stories, testimonials like that of Anthony Perez, a gun violence victim who has been left paralyzed and frustrated in dealing with the system and getting elected officials to deal with the violence in his community, this is nothing new to you, right?
No, Isaiah, it goes back to what I spoke about to legislators last legislative session when we were dealing with issues on whether we should keep more people locked up who are charged with violent crimes as opposed to keep releasing them on bond after bond. And I told the elected officials, here's something I never hear anybody talk about, and that's the cost of victimization. Nobody talks about what it costs when a family loses a loved one who happen to be the breadwinner of the family, and now they can no longer contribute to the family because they were shot and killed, and now this family has to fend for themselves. Or in many cases where victims actually survive a shooting, and many of them do because of advanced medical techniques that we have, the lifetime of pain, grief, agony that they have to endure. And one of the examples that I used was we had someone a year ago, and the case is still unsolved, of a convenience store clerk that was shot in the face. Had months and months and months of medical rehabilitation, couldn't work, and the costs were astronomical. But no one wants to talk about the lifetime of costs. More importantly, the emotional agony that someone has to endure for a lifetime. No one wants to discuss that.
With Anthony Perez's case, he was left paralyzed and was not born a foster child, but was a foster child in the foster system. So he has no family members to really lean on. And he said at one point he worked 2 and 3 jobs to survive. Now you're left in a wheelchair after someone pulled a trigger on a corner that is known to be violent.
You know, I wish, Anthony Perez's case is not an anomaly. It's not unusual. It's something that we see every day. The crime victim compensation funds that we use for victims of violent crime basically will pay maybe not even a fraction of somebody in Anthony's case. Basically in his case, because he's considered to be the top of the line, someone who's qualified, he'll be lucky if he can get $150,000, which might pay a day or two on it. But the rest, you're on your own. Nobody does fundraisers like we see with people who are victims or end up being deceased on that. You're basically left on your own, and I think it's something that you're going to have to see being addressed next legislative session. And another great example is some of those who survived the Uvalde school shooting as well. Everybody was talking about helping them with cost factors and raising funds and so forth, and talking about crime victim compensation. And I said, you're going to have to restructure crime victim compensation funds because you're dealing with surviving victims who are dealing with debilitating injuries that often last for a lifetime. And $150,000 just isn't going to cut it.
And Andy, do you see many victims out there who survive becoming almost advocates, hoping and pushing for a change like Anthony is now doing, trying to hold elected officials accountable for the violence that takes part in his community?
I encourage people like Anthony, and what I would encourage Anthony to do is to continue to reach out to your city council members, your county commissioners, your state representatives, your state senators, including your federal senators as well, and say, hey, look, I'm an example of what it's like to survive gun violence. Here's what I have to do just to survive every day. We need your help. And again, it just goes back to what I said last legislative session. Do you ever see studies on the cost of victimization? I never do.
No.
I do see studies on what it costs if we do keep people incarcerated, but I never ever see anything about what it costs for someone who, in Anthony's case, is going to have a lifetime You're talking 40, 50 some odd years, maybe at least, of life expectancy. What it's going to cost for him to try to lead a productive life. That's an issue that has to be and must be discussed this upcoming session.
All right. Andy Kahan from Denver, Colorado. Thank you for joining us here on The Factor Uncensored. There's a lot of work to do when it comes to the victims and survivors of gun violence out there, but you guys are helping them out, and we want to thank you for doing your part in the community. Thank you, Andy.